Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations and lead basketball decision maker David Griffin spoke yesterday on the state of the Pelicans, and we have a lot more insight into Brandon Ingram's trade, why the Pelicans struggle at rebounding, and where they need to go from here. Plus, how do Bruce Brown Jr. and Kelly Olynyk fit here in New Orleans? It's a jam-packed episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Wednesday, a game day for your New Orleans Pelicans, back-to-back against the Sacramento Kings. Before we hit the All-Star break here, we'll recap that game tomorrow. But we heard from David Griffin yesterday, speaking after the NBA's trade deadline, the Brandon Ingram trade. And there was actually a lot of insight there, but also some things that you're like, wait, that doesn't add up. And we're going to break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans here. So thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And if you're an everydayer, that means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. Let me know in the comments down below. So let's get into it. The David Griffin post-trade deadline media availability. So if you've been waiting for David Griffin to speak, this is when they do it. GMs don't usually speak during the year very much. There's just nothing to address. I mean, there's things to address, but talking doesn't do a whole lot of good. After the trade deadline, though, almost every GM truly speaks to the media and will field questions, not just about the moves that were made at the trade deadline, but kind of the state of the team. So this is kind of like a state of the Pelicans address from David Griffin here. And there are a lot of takeaways, and I want to get into a few things here. So let's start with the Brandon Ingram trade. The big news yesterday with that was that he signed an extension with the Toronto Raptors, 3 years, $120 million. I believe it's a player option for the third year. So basically you're looking at $40 million a year. He's looking at a 2 for $80 kind of deal. $40 million. Could he have signed that here with the Pelicans? The answer is maybe to that. But when you hear David Griffin talk, especially with the emergence of Trey Murphy and the extension that they gave him, the Pelicans couldn't afford it and just didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. But also, I do think Brandon Ingram wanted out, and David Griffin kind of talked about that. If you're upset about the return that the Pelicans got, that's not enough for Brandon Ingram. That makes total sense. And this is going to go to a point that we're going to talk about in the next segment when we look at the center position, rebounding, length, size. David Griffin said there was just no deal in the offseason. Why'd you deal him now versus why didn't you trade him in the offseason? It takes two to tango, right? This is not NBA 2K. If there's no trade out there, there's no deal to be had. You can't seize an opportunity if no opportunity arises. And I think if you look at a couple teams around the league that didn't make moves, maybe that was part of why. So that's a big part of it. And then it sounded like both Ingram, the team, Clutch, his representation, just said, let's go into the season and we'll figure it out. And they eventually did. And I think the Pelicans got about as good of a return as they could probably get for Brandon Ingram on an expiring deal. But $40 million, could he have just signed it here? A couple of years ago, he turned that down. And I think it does look like he realized the market wasn't going to be there for that max $52 million a year deal. And thus he ended up signing with Toronto when he just wanted a clean break. And when you hear comments from Zion and Trey in their media availability post-trade deadline, it kind of really does say that he wanted out. And look, totally, he had every reason to want out and not be here by feeling kind of disrespected from the team. And in a sense, they did disrespect him, right? This is someone who, on one hand, kind of gave his all for the franchise, and I agree with that. As I've said, he's long been a good soldier. There were no complaints. Like, he did not make this messy. And I said, during this, when a lot of other people were like, this is going to get messy it was never going to get messy because that's not Brandon Ingram. And there wasn't really leverage to make it messy either. And then once the injury happened, there's just no way he could really make it messy. So Zion and Trey basically were just like, yeah, it's business. Like, if he thought a trade is the best for him or another place to be is the best thing for him, like, we wish him the best and we totally get it. So One, it speaks to Ingram's presence in the locker room and how much those guys love him, how much Jose loves him, Najee loved him. Like, he's a good teammate. Good teammate. I was on Locked On Raptors and I said that. So they lost him in that sense. You know, I think one of the things that David Griffin said here, which was really interesting when he was looking at how have you succeeded, how have you failed with this franchise, is like, one of the things we failed was availability, right? Like, we failed to put two guys that are making near max money on their previous contracts, at least, that only played 34% of their games together. They're basically averaging something like less than 10 games per year together in their time here. That's factoring in Zion's year where he missed the whole season. So it skews the numbers a little bit. If you take that out, it looks different. They just weren't playing enough, and that means you're going to fail. And that's why I ultimately think that David Griffin was like, yeah, we've just got to make some sort of change here. And I think it's probably best for all parties involved. So you saw that there. So that's a big takeaway, especially when you see the contract that Ingram signed. You're like, wait, we could have gotten him for that. Yes and no. Yes and no. More really just no, not even at $40 million a year. Another thing that he mentioned that I thought was really important in this one is Herb is likely going to be shut down for the season very soon. We kind of knew that was going to be the case. It's been kind of obvious for a while with that, but don't expect to see Herb Jones back out on the court this season. Get healthy, Herb. We love you here. On Zion and load management, I've talked a lot about this, and he actually spoke about, Daniel Bove, who handles that kind of thing. They have a lot of data on this that it's like, we're going to keep him healthy. We're going to keep him fresh. We got to manage this hamstring because hamstrings can reoccur at a pretty high rate. We do not want this to happen. So the load management essentially is backed by science. And when you looked at the injuries here, particularly soft tissue injuries, they only had one of those last season. And they were pretty much didn't have any until Zion's at the end of the year there. This year, there have been just a lot of fluke injuries and things like that. So he really deflected any blame to the player performance and care team, basically like the medical staff, as you will. And I've been talking to y'all about, how they can measure that, how they're really keeping tabs on his fatigue levels and his muscle strength and things like that, that this is kind of just the load management is backed by science. They're also losing. There's just no need to play him more than 28 minutes per game this season. And David Griffin kind of said it. This team's going to be tanking post All-Star break. He said that they are going to be having conversations with head coach Willie Green about developing guys for the future. Guys like Carlo Makovich, Antonio Reeves, who they're really high on and view him as a two-way guy. Jordan Hawkins as he continues to kind of strengthen his back and get healthy again. That's going to kind of become the focus here, which is what it should be for the team at this point in time. Those are some of the biggest takeaways I had here. I'm leaving one out that we're going to talk about in the next segment here. And I also want to talk about a contradiction he said. We'll lead with that. There was something that I really disliked that he said. And I don't know if I like the other stuff that he said either. I'm just kind of leaving it out there as facts. But there's something here where you're talking out of both sides of your mouth and you're being contradictory here. And I get why he's doing it too. And I'll explain what that is. It has to do with culture, good humans. Let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. And I always find that like decluttering, refreshing your space helps you get back into a routine. Or look, it's Mardi Gras season. Maybe you got people coming over, parties. You got to have the house looking festive. So whether you're making it looking fun, whether you're tidying up, cleaning out, just want to give your space a new look, Wayfair has everything you need all within your budget. My whole place is furnished with Wayfair, pretty much. The desk that I am working on right now, you hear that? It's sturdy from Wayfair. A bunch of the art actually have a lot of Jordan prints and other things like that, shoe prints. It's really cool. All off Wayfair. It's not just furniture, but it's everything for your home. So there's something for every style in every home, no matter your space or your budget. And Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your home goals with endless inspiration for every space. So if you know what your decor style is, you can search by that. If you're not sure, you can just get on there, browse around, and you're going to find inspiration. And if you're in a time crunch, Wayfair has free delivery, fast, hassle-free. So give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. By the way, do you get the free daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter? It's in your inbox Monday through Friday. One stop for ultimate Pelicans and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. So we went over a couple of key takeaways, things that I just found interesting from David Griffin. There's two more things from this press conference that I want to talk about. The first one was he did a lot of the usual, look, they're David Griffin things. We have good humans here. We have good people. I like them. All of those things. We have championship level human beings in the building. That stuff gets tiring when you're 12-40. Does culture matter? If you have the best culture in the world, if you're losing, does it matter, right? And so as David Griffin kind of went in on this, like I said, you're just kind of tired of hearing of it. It should be, we want to win. And look, David Griffin said, we need to get better in toughness. We need to get better in size, rebounding. We'll get to that. We need to be better about availability. We need to get better about making the most of the opportunities that Zion Williamson creates. We're going to talk about all of that in a second here. But with the culture stuff, I don't care right now. Like, I don't. Culture to me is not overrated. It matters, but winning's the biggest thing here. And that's ultimately what people are judged on, not whether they built, a happy organization where everyone is friends. And I don't think that's what David Griffin means by culture. It means you show up and you work hard and all of that. But if the culture was that strong, would they have suspended Zion Williamson for a game for being late, right? And he talked about that, saying, well, that was just, we give people a handbook. Here's how you got to act. He didn't, so we suspended him, so we had talks about it. And then David Griffin, after all of that, said, one of the words I think is the most overrated in the league. I think culture is one of the most overused, overrated, whatever it was, words. So he kind of spent a lot of time talking about culture and how they're building something good, but then was like, all that stuff's overrated, kind of. And I don't think he really meant to contradict himself like that, but it comes across that way. And so that I do think is something that they need to, they're going to say publicly the right things. And that's what he's doing here. It's not going to be like our culture sucks or anything like that. It's just, hey, we got to get better in these areas, and we believe we're building something and we're moving in the right direction, even if, we got a longer ways to go than we would have thought. So that's what I got to say on those kind of comments, that he definitely contradicted himself. And at the end of the day, just win. Guys, nice. It's like Glengarry Glen Ross, right? Where it's Alec Baldwin walks through the room, that whole speech that probably a lot of us know. Coffee is for closers speech and all of that, right? It was like, oh, you're a good dad? Like, F you, go home to your wife and kids. I don't care, because you're here to do this job. And there's something to have that edge, I think, that the Pelicans maybe are lacking with some of this. So he did talk a lot about rebounding and the center position. And there's a very key distinction that I think needs to be made here. And I probably should have led with this. I actually find this really important. He said we're one of the worst rebounding teams, not just in the league, but in a really long time. And they are. They're just not a good rebounding team. And we could have seen this coming. They are 30th in terms of defensive rebounding percentage right now. They're not bad on the offensive glass, but defensive rebounding, they're crap at. And we all saw this coming once Jonas Valanciunas left, and they failed to address the center position to upgrade that. So he's saying, why, if you're bad at rebounding, why didn't you do something? So here's the distinction that is important. I promise you, they have tried to upgrade the center position beyond just Yves Missi. Before Missi, come back a couple of years, they have tried to address the center position. This goes to something we said earlier. They have tried. They have tried to trade for Myles Turner. They've tried to trade for Jarrett Allen. They've tried to trade for Wendell Carter Jr. and other players too. They've tried to trade for basically every center that you could conceivably get in the league. They have tried to trade for. They have failed to accomplish what they tried to do. And that's the important point. I see a lot of people, and this is not to defend the team. These are just facts, in my opinion, or defend David Griffin. These are just facts. It's not like they didn't try to do anything. There is a difference between being like, yeah, whatever, we'll figure, it'll be fine. We're not going to do anything about it. And then being like, oh, shoot, we suck. I swore there. It's that they tried and failed, and that's different from not doing anything at all. It's still not good. Still leaves you with the same problem. And I don't want to be like, you've got to give them credit for trying, but that is a thing. When I was on our squad show, which premiered yesterday here on Locked On Pelicans, we were talking about the Nuggets of like, why the heck didn't that team do anything, right? Like, why didn't they try and make a trade? And Matt Moore, who's great, said, well, you've got to have an opportunity in the first place. And if an opportunity doesn't present itself, there's nothing to do. It goes to that point about the Brandon Ingram trade in the last segment. If there's no opportunity to make a deal, it's not like they passed on offers or trades that they could have done, or at least trades that would have made sense, right? You're not going to trade Ingram and Zion or Trey Murphy for Jarrett Allen, right? Like, you're not going to do that. So they've tried and failed in that regard, and that's different than not trying at all. It is an important point. They know they need to upgrade the center position, and if David Griffin is here next year, and I have no clue if he is or not, he's going to operate like he is until he isn't. They're going to look to upgrade that this offseason. I can tell you that. They love Messi. They love Messi, but they are going to look to upgrade that position no matter what. I think they were looking to potentially upgrade it at the trade deadline had they not been, super bad in all of this. So that's by bad, I mean the record and all of that. So they've tried. And that is an important distinction, I think, here when it comes to all this. They have failed. Maybe that means they should be fired. The ownership should move on from them. But there's something to be said of like, could another GM have pulled anything off? And I don't know if the answer to that is yes. So that's an important distinction, I think, when kind of looking at where they are with the center position here. And look, in a weird way, this just gives them a gap year, a la Memphis last year, which he mentioned, and we knew he was going to mention that, of like, look at them. They were good. They were bad. They're good again. We think we can do that. They believe they can compete next year. I think that loss to OKC says, like, I'm not so sure about that. Go listen to that show if you haven't, even though I think they can be competitive next year. I also think the injury to DeJounte Murray does complicate that a little bit. He also mentioned Zion Williamson loves being point Zion. They're going to need a whole lot of point Zion going forward after the injury to Murray that's going to linger into next season. They also did mention that toughness and a little bit more shooting needs to be added to this roster. Upgrading the defense. They went from a good, David Griffin wouldn't call them elite, but said good defensive unit, but not elite, to real bad this year. Real bad. Now, a lot of that is injuries. A lot of that is injuries to Herb Jones, to DeJounte Murray, too. Zion's been good, I think, defensively this year. You're seeing pretty insane effort from him. Not insane, but good effort from him on that side of the ball. But overall, they know they need to get better there. They're going to try and improve that. I think health will go a long way with that next season. As well, if you can add a little bit more rim protection, which Messi just is not right now. And I don't think he's going to be an elite rim protector or even like a good to great rim protector next season either. So there you have it. So coming up next, 2 new additions, Bruce Brown Jr., Kelly Olynyk. Let's talk about them and when we're going to see them on the court, because not both of them are going to be playing tonight. I'll give you the updates there and how they might fit into the Pelicans, both in the short term and long term. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by OpenPhone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. And as your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where OpenPhone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. So for just $15 a month, 2 coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. OpenPhone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you still have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. And right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have an existing number with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you need to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. You're going to know everything going on with this Pelicans team. So subscribe, join on YouTube, become an everydayer, all of those things here. And go make Locked On Saints your second listen. Kellen Moore. I'm a Kellen Moore fan after the Super Bowl here. Does Ross Jackson like the move? He seems pretty excited. What's the offense going to look like next year? Is Derek Carr going to be the QB? They're talking about it over at Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into Bruce Brown Jr. and Kelly Olynyk and what their roles could be with this team. So a couple of quick updates here. I think you're going to see Bruce Brown Jr. play in this game tonight against the Sacramento Kings. No reason not to. They're not switching to full-on development until probably after the trade deadline. Even then, he's going to play a good bit. Kelly Olynyk will be joining the team soon. I believe he's getting his work visa, from what I've been told, kind of straightened out. He's Canadian, been playing for Canadian teams, so that kind of like changes things here, I think, a little bit. So you will see him with the team soon enough. You know, you look at them in this trade and you're like, well, they were just there to match the salary of Brandon Ingram. And to an extent, that is correct. But I do think these are two players that the team would really like. Kelly Olynyk is a backup big, 6'11", and he has a good three-point shot. It's not volume or anything like that, but this is someone who, for his career, has shot 37% from three. This year, in 24 games, 16 minutes per, he's shooting 44.2%. Last year with Toronto was lower. The year before that with Utah in 50 games, 43%. These are pretty good numbers overall, you know, and I think that when you look at him in the shooting that he's done, this is someone that can fill a backup big man role, right? With Miami, which was the best kind of some of the best volume of his career, 36% on 4 attempts per game. When you're in Houston, 27 games here, 39% on 4.6. Like there's been moments where you're like, oh yeah, the volume is not bad there for him and he can make a difference. You just got to get a floor spacing big that you trust out there with Zion Williamson, and they think that Olynyk can do it. It's cheap enough at $13.5 million basically next year. He's above average to average defensive rebounder, so that's good. Keep him for a little bit. See if you move him in the offseason if the right offer. I don't think you just give him up for second-round picks or anything, but you could also package him in a deal for another player, and, you know, there you go with it, right? It's just kind of as simple as that. I think that's what his role is going to be. I think for a backup big man, that's pretty good overall. So perfect. You know, for Bruce Brown Jr., I think it ties to what we just talked about in the last segment. They need some toughness. They need better defense. That's kind of what he is known for. He's dealt with a lot of injuries recently, but when you looked at him with Denver a couple of years ago when they won the title, you know, this was someone that was a very good role player, bench guy, kind of secret weapon at times for them, shot the three ball well enough. He's not a good three-point shooter at all, but he's someone that gives you a lot of energy, switchability. Despite being slightly undersized, he can defend multiple positions. He's 6'4". If they're trying to improve the defense, Bruce Brown Jr. is the guy that's going to kind of give you that sort of energy. He's overpaid now given the injuries that he's had. And you wondered that once he left Nikola Jokic and took a big money deal, was that going to kind of factor into this and, you know, mean that he wasn't going to be as good? He signed, you know, a 2-year, $45 million contract basically after that title winning season with Denver, $22 million last year. This year, $23 million. You know, they're open to re-signing him as probably think like the Najee Marshall kind of role, right? Guy that comes in, gives you a boost of energy, flies around, tries to make some plays on defense, a little chaotic, but in a good way, fights harder than he should for rebounds at 6'4", and helps you. And then becomes valuable later down the line. He's not going to make $23 million next year. This is someone who's probably looking max at a mid-level exception deal, and I don't even think that given the lack of games played over the past couple of seasons. Last year, he played a total of 67 games. This year, he is only played 18 so far because of the injuries. So I think you'll see him sign a pretty team-friendly deal. It's not guaranteed that he will come back in New Orleans, but he's certainly not going to come back at that number whatsoever of what he's making before. If he can give you a boost here and they like him, I think that could be a situation where you're like, okay, this dude can do something for this team, and that could be pretty helpful overall. And again, becomes a tradable guy further down the line. So you sign him thinking that maybe you can trade him a little bit later. There's worse things than that, I think. So there you go. That's going to be their roles. He's the defense energy guy off the bench. Kelly Olynyk is a stretch big. That's a backup big man that is a hole New Orleans has now and probably going into next season too, depending on what they do with the center position. Useful additions, in my opinion, at the NBA trade deadline. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Enjoy the game tonight against the Sacramento Kings. First night of a back-to-back. And then we get away from all the Super Bowl traffic after this All-Star break. We'll have a lot more as we kind of switch to development here too on Locked On Pelicans, I guess. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the game.